Hello, and welcome to another episode of How to Paint. Today we're painting the Veteran Guardsmen from Games Workshop's Kill Team. If you're enjoying this content, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm starting things off by clipping out some of the pieces and using the back of my knife here just to get rid of some of that flash. I'm just using some gentle pressure, I don't want to damage the sculpts. And here I'm using Tamiya's extra thin cement. This is a plastic glue, so it will melt the plastic together and form a stronger bond. And I'm just following the building instructions. I find that super glue actually holds better for the miniature attaching to the base. And with this particular guy, he's kind of leaning forward just a hair, so I put some of these battlefield rocks on the base as well, just to give them some lift. I'm also going to prime these miniatures in the same way I did in the previous episodes, which is all over black and then white from 45 degrees. I'm going to start adding colour with Cloudburst Blue and Speedpaint Medium, and I believe this is a roughly 2-to-1 mix, and I'm just going over the trench coats. I'm making sure I'm getting the arms and the collar and the chest, but I'm not worried about overspill at this point. I'm also going to be batch painting these guys, as there's a fair few of them. Next I'm using Grim Black, and I'm applying this to the guns. I'm also using this for the gloves, the shoulders, and the helmet. Now I'm switching over to Rinox hide, and I'm applying this to the boots. I'm adding just a little bit more detail on the gun here, so the gun butt is going to be in Rinox hide as well. I'm using Deck Tan, and I'm applying this to the gas masks. Here I'm using Morghast bone, and I'm going to be applying this to the soldiers' puttees. And for the trousers, I'm using Citadel Colors the Fang. For the cuffs on the trench coat, I'm using Russ Grey. And Mournfang brown for all the leather straps, just gently applying where I can, just to make sure I'm not overspilling onto any of the painted trench coat. And I'm also using this for the leather box on the chest. Switching over to the back of the soldier, I'm using the Mournfang brown for the backpack. I'm just making sure I get the main leather pouches here. I'm also using this same brown for any additional pouches that I put on while I was assembling. I've gone back to the Morghast bone, and I'm using this for the bedroll. Here I'm using Castellan Green, and I'm applying this to any grenades or additional pouches. Now I'm switching over to some metallics, and I'm starting things off with Scale Colors Old Copper. I'm using this for the cylinder thing that's hanging underneath the backpack. I'm going to be switching back and forth quite a bit, so here I am just using some Rinox hide on the Demo Trooper's backpack here. Now I'm using AK's dark brown enamel wash and thinning with odorless thinner. So this is kind of a strong wash, so I'm making sure that I've got a palette of the wash itself and then a palette of just the mineral spirits. And because this is an enamel wash, you can't wash your brush traditionally in water like you normally would. You have to use the mineral spirits to clean your brushes afterwards. As you can see, it's a very strong wash and it will soak into the miniature pretty quickly. I'm applying this to pretty much everywhere on the miniature. I'm looking for a pretty grim dark style to match kind of Warhammer's aesthetics. And there you can see I'm just taking some of those mineral spirits and just pulling the wash down to the bottom of the miniature. I'm hitting some of the bigger, flatter areas just to make sure that it isn't pooling in places I don't want it to. This wash does take a very long time to dry, so I would just give it a few hours, if not overnight. Now I'm going to switch to Kantor Blue, and I'm just using this blue just to put some more blue back into the midtones on the miniature. You can see that brown wash has kind of washed out some of that blue, and all I've got is kind of brown shadows and grey highlights. So I'm just using that blue just to give it some more colour again. I'm using Russ Grey on the trousers, and I'm just kind of reducing this down to just a single blob on the knee as a highlight. And then I'm also applying the Russ Grey back onto the cuffs. Lastly, I'm just catching some of the folds in the trench coat itself. Now I'm switching over to Victorian brass, and I'm using this for the skull motif on the gun. And also some of the little embellishments on the backpack as well. Because some of these troopers are specialists and not just generic troopers, there's some equipment that might vary depending on how you built your kill team. So for the medic here, I'm just applying it to his gauntlet and the handle of the power sword. I'm switching over to Speed Metal, and this is one of my favorite metallic paints. I'm just using this to catch some of the highlights on some of the metal. So here on the pins, on the grenades, and some of the buttons on the backpack itself. For the helmets and the armor, I'm using it for the main crest on the front here, and then just gently putting some strokes on the side of the helmet for chipping and battle damage. And I'm doing the same to the shoulders. I'm just tidying up some of the finer details that I missed. So for example, the straps here on the bedroll, I'm just using the Mournfang brown again just to kind of catch those. And some more of the brass for the clips. Here's that grim black contrast paint again, and I'm just using this just to add some variation to some of the straps. And the screen on the gauntlet. I've decided I'm going to do the bayonets in the same grim black here, so I'm just kind of going back and forth between each of the miniatures and just getting some of those details that I missed. Here I'm using lead belcher, again for some variation in some of the metal and more details. So on the melter gun here, I'm just using it for the main barrel. And the end of the barrel is in old copper. I'm loosely applying some lead belcher here for the blade on the gauntlet and on the bayonets. For the eyes on the gas mask, I'm going to be doing them in red, so I'm prepping that by just adding some white dots to the soldiers. And I'm using Mephiston red, just gently covering over those white areas. And the white will actually just boost that red saturation just a hair. Here I'm using Trollslayer orange for the highlight, and it's just a single dot in the corner of the lens. Again, this is just more detail work, so this is blood red speed paint, and for the medic syringe, this section really does depend on how you built your kill team, but as long as you've decided on a colour scheme, you can just go back and forth with the existing colours. And I'm using the grim black here as a kind of waterline, so that it appears that he is actually drawing fluid. And for any of the soldiers that have that chest dial exposed, I'm just painting that in red as well. I'm using a uniform grey, and I'm dry brushing this onto the guns. And just some quick speed metal strokes here on the end of the barrel. I'm using the dark wash again, and I'm making sure I just get all the guns. And for the plasma weapons, I'm using an airbrush here, so I'm just starting things off with a white airbrush. And I'm switching over to Tesseract Glow. It's a very thin paint, so it comes out of the airbrush really nicely. And I'm just gently applying that just to the surrounding area. Here I'm using a very thin white for the coil. And it wasn't quite thin enough, so just with a damp brush, I'm actually wicking away some of that white to expose the green underneath. And here I'm using Angel Green, and I'm just gently dragging the brush over the top of those coils, just to give it some contrast. And lastly, I'm just using some of that Tesseract Glow just to add some glow to the surrounding areas. Now for the power sword, I'm using Necromancer Cloak, and just very loosely applying a couple of highlights here. I'll switch out to the uniform grey, and while the paint's still wet, I'll just blend the two together. And for the highlight, I'm using some of the speed metal again, and I'm just using the edge of the brush just to catch the edges of the sword. And I'm adding some more contrast to the sword here with some grim black just down the middle. And the same for some of the details on the top. And now for the bases. I've got a variety of materials here. This is just an old paint stick I got from a hardware store. I also found this barbed wire at a hobby store as well. So I'm curling the wire around a straw. And then I'm using AK's Wet Ground. This is an acrylic paint with some gravel mixed in. And I believe some gloss as well. I think this dries shiny. So I'm just using this on the base here, just adding a bunch of mud. Dropping in some of the battlefield rocks. Some of the sticks that I've broken up. And just caking the whole thing in mud, just getting it really messy. Once this paint dries, it will keep everything in place anyway. I'm also dabbing some of the mud on the back of the trench coat. I don't want to go overboard here, I just want to make it look like they're part of the base itself. So I'm applying this to the back of the trench coat and the boots. And once that's dry, I'm now applying the dark wash again back onto the mud here, just to give it some dimension and depth. I made this mine token with one of the spare bases, and you can see just how quickly that dark wash just soaks into those pieces of wood. Finally, I'm painting the rims of the bases black. And I'm going to finish these miniatures out with some of the decals. Firstly, I'm just very carefully cutting out the decals from the sheet and then soaking them for about 30 seconds, maybe 40 seconds. And the trick to the decals is that they won't actually set until the water is dry. So as long as you keep that area wet and just some gentle pressure with the brush, it will be able to move where you need it to be. And I'm applying some extra decals to the specialists in the team. Lastly, I'm just adding a dab of the decal set here and finishing the miniatures out with some matte varnish. And there you have it, the Veteran Guardsmen ready for Kill Team. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like the video, comment below, or subscribe if you haven't already. Happy painting and happy gaming!